So, good morning everybody, and massive thanks to Liz for inviting me here to the Festival of Gold. And I'm really encouraged by what I was hearing yesterday and fascinated by that last presentation. I also would like to acknowledge the Indigenous and First Nation communities on which land we speak today, on which land we dance today, and show my respect to the elders past, future and present, and also to First Nation artists and communities who are attending and taking part in the festival today. Here we go. So, my speech is titled Identity and Perception and its Impact on Artistic Choices. You notice I say it's an autobiographical contemplation because I will say it is all my own opinion predominantly, unless I say otherwise and I'm quoting somebody else. That's how I want to go about the presentation with you today. I really wanted to touch on my identity and what it means to me, and consider how our perception of culture in the UK is dictated by a construct, the creative case, set up by the Arts Council of England, known from now on as ACE, they're so ACE, and how it impacts on the work that I've been involved in over the last sort of 25, 30 years. I want to consider my life and career in dance and share my thoughts about belonging, nurture versus nature, and a reflection of difference. As I move on from Merseyside Dance Initiative, MDI, as will be known as MDI from now on, an organisation I've worked with, as Liz was saying, for 25 years, and I'm 57, so it's nearly half of my life that I have spent in this organisation. And I think as I move on, I've really begun to contemplate really what democracy and diversity means for me, and how it's playing a role with my practice as a creative, cultural leader and producer. As we know, dance regularly contributes to the discourse of our society. For many years, it has borne witness to political events, social customs, and the agenda of the day. Whether we're always aware of it or not, the artist in our society is political and can make a difference in the world we live in through being present. I'm interested to question and ponder what can reveal back to ourselves from a point in making ourselves more visible as diverse protagonists, and the role of black female leaders in challenging and making more seen our practice and contributions. When I accepted this invitation from Liz, as mentioned, I was at crossroads, leaving an organisation that I'd been leading for 25 years, feeling like I'd more or less set it up from scratch, and thus I've kind of been heavily invested in it as much as it has been heavily invested in me, and my identity has very much been NDI as much as NDI has been my identity. So suddenly I'm in this place of wondering where I actually am. It's quite interesting, having worked all my life for organisations, suddenly being freelance and available to travel the world. So the world we're in right now is complex, and so much is going on in Britain right now with Brexit. God knows what's going to happen. I think we should really need to consider what that kind of political, environmental and social landscape looks like. Being part of the cultural sector, and in particular dance, we tend to talk to the converted. I'm sure we're all converted here today. And I think we know the impact that dance has and how it transforms lives. Not everyone, though, has that opportunity. I think we have a sense of privilege sometimes that I think we really take for granted. But I think it's obvious through the work that I'll describe that NDI has been doing, the work that's happening in dance across the UK, that people have mentioned actually over the last couple of days. And obviously what's happening in Canberra in this festival really demonstrates how connecting with people, dance can really make a difference and bring those people from the periphery into the community. So, I call this identity in me. Obviously, we know that our identity is very much based on who we are and how we go about talking about ourselves. And, you know, in short terms, you know, I'm a British citizen and I'm a female, that's my identity, and that's what it leads to. But culturally, if I consider what my identity is, it's a much bigger thing. So if we think about Stuart Hall here, and he talks about a shared culture, a collective of one's true self, and that sometimes we can be, it's more superficial and artificial, and it can be imposed. And so I then start to think of who am I within that construct of being a cultural identity. And for me, I'm a black, female, African heritage Scouser. So a Scouser is somebody from Liverpool. I won't get into all of that, we can talk about that later. But that's the accent that you'll hear. I think there is a real discourse around other views, I think, of cultural identity at the moment. And Stuart Hall, who I mentioned, has identified in his research cultural diversity and the diaspora. That considers not just points of similarity, but points of difference, which can constitute who we really are, and thus what we have become. So we need to consider our identity, not just in being, but in becoming. And I've really connected with this. I really want to find a way of beginning to think about who I am in my being and in my becoming. She's so cute. So, I was born in 1962 to a single white female, my mum. You can imagine how difficult that must have been for her at that time. There was only 2 black kids in the neighbourhood, me and another girl. And in processing what I wanted to talk about today, I began to really reflect on my past, which I hadn't done in such a long time, because now I'm thinking about me for a change, as opposed to just this big organisation. And I think within that, I started to think about my own identity and what I've encountered through my life, and how that reflects how I proceed to make decisions in the future. So growing up predominantly, initially, in an all-white working class Catholic community, was for the most part, it was fine. I'm very loved. I've had a really good upbringing. However, there were moments that I started to recall because of this talk about how I was treated really on, which I never really expressed. And I remember that my maternal nan had this neighbour, and for some reason they'd always had this feud. Now, at this point, I never thought of myself as different. I was just in this family, and I was me, and I was loved. But this woman one day just started shouting over the fence, you know, "You nigger lover." And I was thinking, what does this mean? A kid at school at age of 5 would be calling me nigger, wog, getting pencils and putting them in his nose as a Zulu. And I was I just didn't know what was going on, because it was not part of the world that I was living in. And I remember my poor mum, bless her, she would be up and down to school every day, what I'm saying about my daughter, I'm not having this, how dare you, treat her differently, etc. And they used to say, oh, you know, say something back to him, you know. What could I say? They were all white kids, and the only discerning thing that was different about him was he had red hair. So I could kind of say, ginger. It didn't kind of have the same gravitas or meaning, so I kind of just let it go, and I carried on. But I think it's really interesting that we ignore sometimes those impacts on our bodies and how we then move forward. I think it's really important to reconsider those and take them back. And these types of intimidation can make you go one of 2 ways, I guess. They can either break you or they can make you, and I'm still here, so I'm making it really well. Thank you very much. So just a little bit more about that background. You know, my dad died when I was 6 months old, and thus my early years were very much informed by my white family and my community. And I actually didn't meet my paternal grandmother until I was 19. And then I suddenly had this black African family, this new identity, and a kind of a sense of belonging. And that's not to take anything away from my Irish white heritage, but suddenly there was a real difference in terms of my reference points for moving forward that then defined my artistic producing model, I think. So as I've said, I also come from a family of women, and what's fantastic, whether she knows it or she doesn't, and I'm sure she does, Liz has kind of created this plethora of female antagonists and protagonists this week, which has been fantastic to see. And I think I was brought up by my mum's mum, my nan, my aunties, and they were a real major influence on me. They created this person that we see today. I'm driven, I'm hardworking, I'm honest. I hope I'm funny sometimes. I'm extremely controlling. And their investment in me, I think, meant that I really wanted to strive to be better than I was, considering where I was at that time. And I ended up in a secondary school in the suburbs, in a grammar school, an all-girls Catholic school run by nuns. Surprise, surprise, the only black kid in the school. And obviously, it was quite a posh school. They spoke really well. And I didn't. I was a real scouser. So I kind of was wondering how that would play out. And funnily enough, the colour of my skin for the first time wasn't the issue. They were more worried that I was so common that they were really scared of me. I was this shy kid. So that kind of, my sort of roughness became my toughness. And I was suddenly a completely different person. And it sounds really odd, but my confidence seemed to grow. And I remember my nan saying, "Who the hell are you? What have they done to you at that school?" Answering me back and being really confident, So it's really strange how I think we are perceived sometimes. It just made me smile to remember all of that. So I know my mum, was a bit shocked when I decided that I wanted to train in dance, because that actual school brought an introduction to me. Suddenly I was dancing, which I'd never done, never been part of who we were growing up. And so I went, as Liz said, I went to the Lava. And when I look back, it was just the best thing that I ever could have done. And again, suddenly I wasn't the only black kid, because it was the time of Fame. Do you remember Fame, the movie? Fame on the telly. And suddenly all black kids were allowed in. It was fantastic. So, I think we were an experiment at the time. So that made a really interesting kind of catalogue of experiences, of techniques, of skills to enable me to kind of develop where I wanted to be. And it's really interesting that, I've kind of created my career, I've developed, I've moved on, people know who I am, but still, these little moments happen every so often. So there's been a couple of things where I went to, when I first started, just before I started MDI, I went to a meeting of black dance, and this black dancer said, "What are you doing here? You're not black enough to be in the meeting." And I was thinking, oh, it's really strange. So when I started MDI, I opened up the first black dance meeting, invited him along, so there you go, very inclusive. Hope you're all black enough to be here, which of course it was. That's the So, and then I went on to present about a project to some local councillors. And there was a guy with me, a local officer, and he kind of said, "Oh, I didn't realise, Karen, you were so working class. I didn't realise how strong your accent was. Do you think they actually understood that presentation that you did?" And I said, "Well, I think so, because they've given me the grant, so I think we're okay there." And it's that constantly having to consider who you are, which is unbelievable. And just a final one on that. Most recently, I was at a conference in Liverpool, and Jude Kelly, some of you may have heard of, the former artistic director at South Bank, London, was giving a keynote address, and she posed this action, and she said, "Put your hand up if you know you are not of common stock." In her defence, she was merely trying to pose the context that, in her keynote, that culture was for everyone, and that for the most part, if we consider our origin, we're all commoners. However, my cousin on my paternal grandmother's side of the family had recently delved into the family's ancestry. Who knew? So, my hand goes right up. And what happened was, they didn't realise that I knew that I was a descendant of Robert the Bruce, the first of Scotland. So, come on, raise your hand. So, And what was interesting is that colleagues and friends who know me were laughing, and they would go, "Put your hand down, Karen. You've misunderstood. You know, you're common. Put your hand down." And I thought, how on earth could this black working class Scouser not be common? And I'm not, so there you go. Full circle. So, in terms of this session, I just want to share a little bit about what demonstrates the working world that I'm living in at the moment, and how who govern what we do are in positions of power to create systems that affect and manipulate how we take part in, create and consume culture, be that dance or any other art form of cultural experience. I'll talk a little bit about the work of MDI in some detail. However, in November, I produced the Leap Dance Festival, as was mentioned, and I was really lucky to collaborate with Dr. Sarah Black from Liverpool University and create an international conference called Our Dance Democracy. And in bringing some great scholars and artists together, Liz included, I found a real enthusiasm to fully consider who we are and what is our role in examining the world we live in. And Professor Victor Merriman was the first keynote, and he really set the tone for what we were going to discuss. We were considering how our cultural experiences intervene in the creation of civic and civil geographies. And what I took from this was, how do we consume culture? And how does power dictate what is culture? And as a society, we are culturally deficit within a world where art has the ability to really bring about change. And so how do we support and challenge that status quo in order to offer solutions in thinking about each other better? Democracy is a common public and communal value system which provides an ethical framework for how to act in public, encounters with others in interests of justice for all. Neoliberal social arrangements invert these priorities in the name of individual accumulation. Its governed mentality is authoritarian. Its value system is personal, private, and individualistic, framing all human interactions as transactions in which each party competes with the other to secure personal advantage. One of the features of this social regime is the narrowness of its scope. It's all about me. It's not about us. And the shortness of its social imagination. It's restricted to self-interest, as perceived in the transactional moment. It can only lead to social degradation. As the fate of Britain's systems of education, health and transport demonstrates most starkly, short-termism is a defining feature of British commercial thinking, causing cyclical problems and crises. And since 1979, it's been imposed on us in public institutions and the services that we provide. It's breaking Britain in the process. I need hardly mention that one of the areas of this experience most comprehensively captured and failed by neoliberal austerity politics is cultural work. And you may reference this yourselves in what's going on here. I'm not sure of your circumstances. But what we're finding is that formally funded to really sustainable levels, it's now a micro-managed compliance with excruciatingly irrelevant data collection practices. Such organisations as do survive are overwhelmingly staffed by administrators, PR people, marketing workers, with the artist suddenly constantly left struggling in the background. And it's not compatible with making art. And I know just from experience, the constant negotiating that we're having to go through, the hoops that we're jumping through, the boxes that we're ticking, it's just going on. And I think we need to really kind of shift that paradigm a little bit. And he talked about setting up a number of proposals to mitigate deficit culture, and I'm kind of just sharing that there. I'm realising that I'm probably going to start running out of time, so I won't talk to that particular slide. So, as I've been contemplating this concept of democracy and neoliberalism, where does that leave diversity and equality? What is the true meaning of diversity from a black arts leader's perspective? in a democratic civic society. And as a black female leader in dance for over 30 years, why am I still concerned at the lack of visibility that exists? Black makers and artistic leaders in the UK generally are quite invisible. It's really unbelievable how we are having to really make a case to exist and to be making work, producing work and creating work. But interestingly, in 2011, myself and the team at NDI, we worked with Arts Council England, ACE, in launching their own creative case, funnily enough. And it came about through a piece of work by Sir Brian McMaster. He was looking at what is quality. And alongside that, the Arts Council's equality team were considering the creative case, really as a reimagining of their approach to diversity and equality. And they were really looking at setting out how these areas can and should enrich the arts and artists and audiences in the wider society. In recent years, their work on diversity has been driven by a number of cases, be they legal, moral, ethical, and obviously a case for business. The creative case, I think, is the strongest that they came up with at that time, because they created all of those different cases in one. And unfortunately, the equality team of 2011 who created this construct, with the austerity measures that then occurred, were all taken out of the system. So the Arts Council was perpetuating, working through a creative case. Then all the people who had created the creative case no longer had jobs in the Arts Council. So again, it's a sense of, if those people are then pushing an agenda, the agenda will start to get lost. Even though I know Arts Council, through their creative case, are still saying they are fundamentally committed to that. I remember the piece of Basil Jess, who was the Arts Council, Chief of the Arts Council in 2014, he talked about it was so important that as funders and as people, we really need to be considering what the creative case is. And when he created he had this landmark speech, and he talked about this being the first national case for diversity. This is the Arts Council in 2014, having already in 2011 given us the creative case. And it's because as new people are bored, they don't know what they're doing. I spoke to him and I said, Peter, we've already been here. And have we, dear? Because I'm this little black scouser who doesn't really know what she's talking about. So we know that there's this commission, that there is this kind of commitment to ensuring that people tick the boxes of creative case. But if those leaders and artists are not there doing the work, that's all it becomes. It becomes a tick box. The issue for me, and this is really generally only my opinion, I really worry that ACE are no longer sustaining or developing the art, but they're manipulating how we consume and participate within it because of the decisions that they are making in terms of who they're funding and at what level. So, here we are. What am I doing for time, Liz? Because I think I'm going well over.
You're only you're fine. You've got 5 minutes.
Woo! Okay, so obviously, MDI, I was with for 25 years. Dream job, really. Really, it was a dream job. And it brought together for me two of my greatest passions, dance and Liverpool. So when I look at where we started from and where we are now, the change has been quite slow. It's quite a regional and sub-regional organisation. And I'm not actually that convinced that we've changed that much locally or nationally. The dance sector in the northwest, where I'm from, it remains quite underfunded. The politics of resource, growth and the economy of scale and ambition that we have sometimes feels a little bit tethered and a little bit manipulated. The last 8 years have been some of the best times of my life, I have to say. Really exhilarating. We've been able to kind of have some fantastically ambitious programs. Yet at the same time, sometimes really depressing, very frustrating. Now, not because of the art form and not because of the city, but in the way in which the government of the UK has really infiltrated into the management of a funding system that no longer considers the damage it makes when it begins to disinvest in particular projects or programmes or activities or artists. And so MDI in 2017 was disinvested by ACE, and I won't lie, I was devastated. I didn't see it coming. I felt quite betrayed, a little bit embarrassed, truth be known. Because you feel like you're letting people down. You know, you've been pushing with this big agenda for 25 years, it's going somewhere, you're building things, you're bringing artists from all over the world, and then suddenly the rug is pulled. And there's a real lack of care, there's a real lack of humanity within that whole process, something else that I think they need to consider. However, what has been fantastic is that we've been able to reconsider who the organisation is and kind of go, do you know what? We don't really need ACE. Well, we do need them, but we don't really need them. There are other partners, there are other programmes, there are other ways of doing, and that is, I think, the state where NDI is right now. So I'm not going to read lots of slides, but just so that you're aware of who MDI is and what we do. It's a strategic organisation. When I left, it was inspiring through dance, but it may have changed now because they've got a new director, so a whole new, different way of doing, I'm hoping. And that's just some information about the organisation and what we do. Like some of the things that you've heard recently, the organisation's approach is very much an inclusive one, looking at ways in which we engage with the art form, using the art form with both participants and audiences and artists, and how important it is to kind of begin to create some physical spaces where people can be to make work. And we have a lot of work with local artists, and we do some work with national and international artists. But the key thing for us is that kind of cultural diversity and inclusivity. And I just wanted to share with you, before I go on to talk about the work of African People's Dance, some of the thoughts of some local artists from the region, just so that you don't get sick of listening to my dulcet tones.
2 minutes.
2 minutes? Oh well, it's a 4-minute piece, we'll cut it short, here we go. If you've got new questions, I'll get another 5 minutes, won't I?
I don't think African dance should be mainly for Africans, but I think other people should be involved in it.
If we are doing a workshop right now, they will love it, they will join, enjoy the workshop. They love the black dance, they love it.
Diversity of genres of dance, I think that's very important in the Northwest. In this scene, you're actually seeing Chinese people doing dancehall, you're seeing white people doing African tradition dance, so I guess it's more of the process what you go through and having that understanding of the background and that appreciation.
I feel really passionate about where I come from and I want to learn more so I can pass it on.
What the general public usually see nowadays is more on the commercial side, because that's what's popular within education, within colleges, dance colleges. It's more like street or commercial classes are the popular classes to go to.
Like for me as a black African dance teacher, I go to a school to do a dance, and then the kids, they're not educated because it's not in their curriculum. But if they put it in their curriculum to educate the kids, I think more kids will be involved at a younger age.
I think it will help create an awareness and help establish our kind of dance.
But the only way it will help if they put that in their curriculum, not just calling us when it's Black History Month.
I think investment is paramount to black people's dance.
The lack of help that black companies may get impacts on not having workshops with people that really know about their craft within dance styles and the diaspora.
Because we don't have the funding here in this country anymore. The more you invest, the more we reach out there. But if you don't invest on us, we can't reach out there. But you have to come and then watch, see our work.
If the investment is there for us, we'll focus on our art. You know, I'm lucky that I got a grant from Residence with MDI.
Because funding is really low at the moment for dancers, because everything seems to be always in London, and that's just a really hard thing to do, always travelling there, because there is talent here, and it will really motivate the students so they know that they're in a great city where they've got artists and choreographers coming in.
Travelling down to London all the time whilst trying to make a wage where I live and in the surrounding areas is really hard. It would be great if more stuff was put on up in the northwest.
But not because we don't have the funding anymore. So I have to raise money myself, go all the way to Africa just to develop my own ideas, to get fresh ideas, to come and teach black dance.
Mentoring from others would be great. I think more support from people that are older and with more knowledge will obviously help because they've got the experience already.
With African dance, sometimes I go off the rails. I do tend to fuse it with street or something like that, which is a good thing. But I feel like it's really as important to teach the students where African dance came from and the traditions of it and the origins of it. Fusing the diversity empowers other dancers to learn different styles and to develop as an artist in that form.
I use African dance generally in whatever kind of dance I do.
I'm going to go really quickly. I'll have to miss some things. That's absolutely fine. So what you've got there was Felix and Lamin and Charlie, who are all from different African countries and have been kind of based in Liverpool for a number of years. And then of course our lovely Talisha, a bit like myself, born and bred Scout. But what was quite interesting is Dance of the Diaspora, African Diaspora, is part of the One Dance UK, which is a sector support organisation in the UK. And I've kind of just left the details there if you want to kind of get in touch with them, because I'm not going to have time to kind of really go through everything. But most interestingly, as a national organisation, they're just in the throes of developing some research through surveying. And what's quite interesting at the moment, what's coming out as the top priorities, obviously right across the board, the same thing. So for these artists who are working in a much smaller level in the Northwest, the same priorities are coming out right across the country: funding resources, showcasing work, being seen, having the work commissioned, and kind of really developing kind of international networking. And that's something that hopefully as are working on, and they've just asked me, because I'm now freelance and I can say for everybody, I'm here you are. The Regenerations and Digital Space Conference is coming on the 7th and 9th of November, so they asked me just to kind of, if you fancy coming to Manchester, come discuss it with them. They're a great organisation, they're doing some really good work. So I'm going to kind of just wrap up really. As I say, I'm in this crossroads, so what's next? What's next is I'm on a mission. Yes, I am on an absolute mission, and I am challenging myself with this manifesto. I really want to ensure that we are able to share our cultural understandings and in how we're perceiving the world at the moment. I definitely want to be celebrating black women, of course, and I really want to try to find a way of how I can begin to engage with a wider funding sector in creating a different creative diversity paradigm. And so moving forward, I was going to have some time off, I said, admittedly. However, I'm just doing a couple of little bits just so that you're aware. So I'm representing all this in the UK. We've got some UK dates coming up, which is fantastic. I'm also really excited to be working with some local artists called the Mother's Day Project. And we're kind of doing a whole bit of work around peace and reclaiming and proclaiming people's need for peace in the world that we're living in right now, and especially in the work that's going on in Liverpool with kind of immigration, migration, everything else. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for listening to me. I had it down to 20 minutes when I did it at home, but thank you all very much.